Greetings, 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 greetings. So lovely to see all of you. So this month I'm going to be talking about my recovery. Um, this month, or sorry, last month was my 16-year anniversary of going to my first meeting. And so I just wanted to share how living in the promises has changed my life, especially I would say over the last more sort of the last few years. I would say the last maybe 5 years, I've been living in the promises more and more. The more work I've done, the more therapy I've done, the more recovery I've done. I've realized that, living in the promises has been pretty phenomenal. And so I just wanted to share that, being in recovery for the last 16 years is not a it's not for the weak. It's not for the weak. It's hard work. But there are some amazing things that have happened in my life ever since I've been in recovery, since the start, really. But I'm noticing over the last few years, because I have done so much work, there has been so many beautiful things that have come into my life. So I wanted to share these things with you. So if you're a newcomer in recovery, if you've been in recovery a long time, if you are struggling with your recovery at the moment, then this episode is for you, because I really want to use this space today to kind of give you some hope. Okay. So, for those of you that don't know me, if you don't know my podcast, my name is June Allen, and I am the founder of the Art of Greatness. And I'm a business coach, I am a speaker, I'm a retreat facilitator, and I'm a racial trauma therapist. And I absolutely love what I do. So I'm just going to get this. For some reason, my notes. Oh, there we go. My phone was stuck and I couldn't see my notes. Okay. Oh, so yeah. So the other reason that I wanted to do this is because I am in a season now in my purpose, in my process, where I'm going to be giving a lot of stuff back, in the sense that I'm actually writing a book. The book that I'm doing is finally, I'm getting a lot more momentum around writing the book. And it's going to be all about Black people that are in recovery, that want to understand racial sobriety, that want to figure out how to work the steps in a way that makes sense to them as a Black person, or a melanated person. And yeah, I mean, all of the stuff that I've learned, both personally, being in recovery, as a therapist, as a racial trauma therapist, all the stuff that I've learned, both training clinically as a therapist and also doing my own recovery work and being in therapy, all of the stuff that I've learned over the last 16 years is going in this book, within the context of this is how you work the steps. If you want to add that extra layer of oppression, of what it means to be in a melanated body and do this work, because these are all gaps that I saw, and it's been a very frustrating journey for me within the context of that. So if you're interested in wanting to know when the book's ready, when it comes out, and obviously I'll be sharing bits and pieces about the book onto my email list. So if you want to join my email list, then go to heal.juneallen.net. That's heal.juneallen.net. That's heal.juneallen.net. Right. So yeah, so three things I just want to add before I kind of get into the content. So if you've got any questions about anything that I've shared in this podcast today, then you can email them at info@artofgreatness.com. Although I am a therapist, I'm not your therapist. So if you would like to book a session with me, you can again go to heal.juneallen.net. And then also the last thing is that if you find anything that I share in this podcast helpful to you, and you have friends, people in recovery, people in therapy that you think might find this stuff helpful, then please share it with them. Okay, right. So let's get into the content. So as you know by now, I'm going to be sharing my 16 years of recovery. Okay. And within the context of what it means to live in the promises, just some reflections on some of the things that what brought me into recovery, what I thought recovery would give me, and yeah, where I am now, how it's changed my life over the last 16 years. Okay, so the first one is that I actually thought that recovery would would get rid of my PTSD. Okay, now obviously growing up in a home that there was a lot of pain, there was a lot of trauma in my family. I basically got complex trauma. I have complex trauma from that, as well as being a black person, a black queer person living in today's society. It's very difficult for us as melanated people to be in this world, to try and navigate these systems and not have some sort of trauma, related to it. So, when I first came into recovery, I was thinking, oh, I'll just do all these little steps and do what's asked of me, and it will disappear. But actually, the opposite is true. If anything, I feel my PTSD, my complex trauma, a lot more intensely because I'm not as numb to it. But the difference that changed, what recovery and therapy has done for me, is that I have more tools and I'm able to manage my complex trauma in a different way. I have a different way, I have a different relationship to it. Okay, it's not something that I'm warring with every day. Like, why am I feeling like this? Getting annoyed with it, trying to, suppress the feelings, trying to deny what's there, trying to deny the impact, all this kind of stuff. Rather than doing any of that, I invite my complex trauma into a conversation with it. I know it sounds really weird, but I have a conversation with it and I ask it, what is it what do I need today? What does my complex trauma require me to do? So when I do things like when I plan my calendar or I look at the things that I've got, the tasks that I've got to do for that day, before I do anything, I kind of check in with myself. Where's my complex trauma at the moment? Where, how am I feeling? Am I triggered by anything? Am I activated by anything? Is there anything that I need to do first in order to ground myself, in order to regulate my nervous system before I sort of lean into doing any type of work? Because I find that if I do it that way around, if I ask the question first rather than trying to override it, which is what the systems want us to do, I find that I have a much better day. I'm a lot more calmer. I'm a lot more grounded. I might need to take more breaks. I might need to go and have a little nap. I might need to go and do some meditation. I might need to go for a walk. I might need to do some shaking meditation. There are so many different tools that I have now to manage my complex trauma. But the complex trauma now doesn't dominate what I do throughout the day because I'm not fighting with it. I have a much more compassionate relationship to it. So it just feels a lot more gentle, So, and also I treat my complex trauma, like it's a chronic condition that I have to manage daily, and that took me a long time to kind of accept that having complex trauma is something that I can't just, I understood it intellectually for a long time, but to actually accept that actually it's an embodied experience was something else, because I just felt if I accepted that I might get overwhelmed, and I didn't want to accept that. So it took me a long time to kind of get to the point where I'm like, yeah, I do actually have this condition, and not only do I have complex trauma, but I have to change the way that I manage my life on a daily basis, because I can't ignore it. I can't ignore it. There are going to be times where, where things get activated. There are going to be anniversaries around, across the whole year that are going to activate me. So I have to learn how to take care of myself in a better way. So, my CPTSD is no longer my enemy in that sense. What it is now is it's data, it's information. These are love messages from my body, from my system, telling me that, it's telling me what my capacity is for that day, and then I get the opportunity to actually respond to that. So I will underschedule my calendar, or again, I'll put all these little things in my calendar instead, like having a little nap, or pausing, making sure I go and have my lunch and all of that kind of stuff, making sure I go to bed earlier, downshifting before I actually go to bed. All of these things that just help my body and my nervous system respond in a very different way to life. And that's basically been down to, my recovery practice and the things that I've learned also in therapy and as a therapist. And it's been mind-blowing, just that shift of not warring with myself, as opposed to really being compassionate with myself. And recovery gave me those things, but it took me a long time to accept what was going on, to understand what's happening, where all of that stuff has come from, the root of all of that trauma, and how to manage it, in the present. So I'm just really, really grateful for that, that I'm no longer fighting with myself. There's no longer that war within myself that I have to do that. The other thing that's been quite painful, that in the early days, I tried to, rather than trying to manage a lot of my symptoms, I would just try to get rid of them. I would hate them. I'd have a lot of hatred for those parts of myself because it was difficult for me to function. It was really difficult for me to function. But what recovery and therapy has done is it helped me understand the whole concept of having different parts of myself and recognizing that in order for me to accept myself, I had to accept all of those different parts. Parts of me that were sad, parts of me that were grieving, parts of me that were confused, parts of me that were happy, parts of me that were joyful, parts of me, that were cheeky. There were so many different parts of me that were that had no real what's the word I'm looking for? They were just kind of going round in my system, and I didn't really have a relationship to any of those parts because there was just so much going on at once. And I just, in the early days, I was just so disassociated from all of the different parts of myself that I was in survival. I was in survival. So that war within myself was real. And I spent a lot of the early days just feeling very disconnected, very numb, very disassociated from myself because I just couldn't cope with being present. Being present was just really hard as a Black person, as a Black woman. I just found it really difficult. But over time, as I said, I've just given myself permission to really work with what's going on for me, to really work with the different parts of me that were activated. And I'm learning to listen to myself in a much different way, in a much more different way, in a much more compassionate way. I'm no longer trying to I'm no longer abandoning myself, compartmentalizing parts of myself that I just can't handle. And now it's a much more, oh, that's interesting, that part is coming in, that part wants me to do this, or pause. So I'm pausing a lot more. My life is much slower, my process is much slower, so that I can listen. One of the reasons why I'm such a workaholic, and I'm still a workaholic now, but I have a different relationship to my workaholism now because my life is much slower. But in the early days, when I was in the insanity of busyness and rushing around and doing all these things, I now understand that I was trying to avoid myself. I was trying to avoid feeling. I was trying to avoid being. I was trying to avoid the responsibility that comes with slowing down because a lot of people talk about rest, a lot of people talk about the soft life, a lot of people talk about, wanting to rest and all this stuff a lot more now. It's very much a trend to talk about these things, but people don't talk about the grief and the pain that often comes with slowing down, you know. But my recovery has given me tools and permission to slow down in a way that I can actually deal with the stuff that comes up, And if you're struggling with slowing down, if you find it hard to rest, if you find it hard to sleep, if you find it hard to care for yourself, to slow down and to meditate and do all these things that help you downshift, if you struggle with those things, chances are you've just got a lot of pain underneath all of those things. And so you're creating all of this busyness in order to protect yourself from what's underneath. Because as soon as you slow down and start resting and being slower in your life, all of that stuff that you've suppressing comes up. Okay. And that can be quite terrifying. That can be quite overwhelming. That can be overwhelming. And then it, it can then just increase the war that's within yourself with all of the different parts. So they become at war because the parts that are trying to protect you are warring with the parts that are trying to be productive, the parts of you that are trying to slow down. And intellectually you need to slow down, but you just find it really hard because you've got all these other parts that are trying to keep you busy. They're trying to protect you from the pain underneath all the slowness. So you end up keeping yourself busy. That's why it's important to, why it's been important for me to have community. It's been very important for me to have community. It's been very important for me to have spaces where I can unpack this stuff, where I can really understand what's going on for me. What do those busy parts that are running up and down, those busy parts of me that want me to that are like bullies sometimes, that want me to keep going. All of these protective parts, even though it's not always the way that these parts kind of play out and act out, it's not always great. It doesn't always feel very nice. But ultimately, I understand that what's underneath a lot of all of that behavior and all of that inner dialogue is they're trying to protect me from quite often pain. Yeah. Those parts are trying to protect me from pain. And so, yeah, sorry about that. Just getting my drink. Yeah, they're trying to protect me from pain, but understanding that and actually taking the time to pause and think about what those parts want me to know, what they want me to explore, what's the invitation from those parts, it then becomes a very different, the response from me is very different. I can then I can be a lot more compassionate to myself. I can be a lot more curious about the things, about the reasons why I might want to do things. It just helps me understand myself a lot more. And I understand myself with a lot more depth and understanding and care and love for myself, and being really kind to myself and really taking my time. So whether it is the part of me that's overeating, or the part of me that's working too much, or the part of me that's people pleasing, or the part of me that's really terrified, or whatever, I can have a much more gentler relationship with these parts of myself, because I understand that they're trying to teach me something. They're trying to help me understand something. They're trying to ask me to question, is this okay? This next step that I'm going to do, is actually okay? Is this person okay? Is this behavior okay? Is this habit okay? They're trying to check in with me, and quite often as well, they're much younger parts of myself. They're much younger parts that that were trying to help me survive, that didn't know any better. And these are parts of me that probably helped me survive certain things when I was younger, when I lived at home, when things were dysfunctional, when there was a lot of pain when I was a child growing up, or when I've been in situations where there's been racism and oppression or whatever. These are all younger parts of me, wounded parts of me, that are trying to keep me safe, that are trying to protect me. So quite often we can demonize these parts of ourselves, whether it's the addictive parts, the compulsive parts, the avoidant parts, all of these parts that act out and do all these things. Those parts can kind of get demonized quite a lot. And this is one of the things that I find that I question in recovery, actually, because they can demonize those parts of ourselves. And some of the stuff that I'll be writing about in the book is really how we can change our relationship to those parts of us that behave in these ways that on the surface it can kind of feel, it's quite can be quite destructive. Obviously, if you're overeating, if you're overspending, if you're in your whatever the addictive behavior is, if you're in that behavior, of course there's that behavior can be quite destructive. But when you look at what's underneath that behavior, what is it trying to protect you from, and all the rest of it, and the survival mechanisms that get triggered when we act out in those behaviors, it's a much more compassionate way to look at it. And if I've found over the years that the more I've questioned those parts of myself in the way that I'm doing in terms of the parts work and it being protective, I'm finding that I'm just a lot more compassionate to myself, and I don't demonize my compulsive behavior. There's an internal dialogue that happens, which is the shift. There's an internal dialogue that happens, and I'm able to then ask myself, okay, so if this compulsive behavior is going to, produce X result, which is I don't really want that result. How can I meet that same need, but do it in a way that's with something that's healthier? Yeah. How can I meet that need and in a way that's healthier, that's more compassionate, without actually having the negative consequences? Because quite often with the addictive behavior, the compulsive behavior, the avoidant behavior, the what the person gets out of that behavior is temporary. It's quite often a temporary fix to something. It's not gonna support you long term. It's destructive long term. So, the alternative behavior or choices that you can make once you recognize what the need is, what need you're trying to meet, is that you will then choose something that's going to not just help you in the moment, in the present when you're in pain, but also it's going to support you long term. So these are the types of things that I've learned about myself, that I'm learning, these are habits that I practice. These are behaviors that I practice. I call them top lines. In recovery, a lot of people talk about bottom lines, which is a bottom line is kind of, for those of you that are not in recovery, a bottom line is kind of like a behavior that you cease to do. If you're in a compulsive loop or you're in a compulsive spiral, so an example of a bottom line might be, I'm not going to I'm not going to walk down this specific path because it's right near, a drinking place that I used to go to, as an example. or I'm not going to drive down a certain road because it's where an ex-partner that I was love addicted to or sex addicted to or whatever. I'm not going to go down that. I'm not going to drive down that particular place or whatever it is. So these bottom lines are going to help you stay sober in whatever fellowship it is, whether it's alcohol, whether it's relationships, whether it's gambling, whether it's you know whatever it is, because you can be addicted to many different things, not just drugs and alcohol, and people can default to those conversations quite easily. But I'm here to tell you, I mean, I'm not drugs and alcohol was not my thing, my jam. My thing was people, being addicted to people and or being avoidant around people, the codependency, all that kind of stuff. So regardless of what fellowship you're in, you can still apply those same conversations to you, and don't just think about it within the context of drugs and alcohol. It is important to widen out those conversations, because people can say, oh, I'm not an addict because I don't drink or do drugs or whatever. But there are so many different ways that we can, so many different compulsive behaviors that we can use to soothe ourselves that are not helpful to us. It's not just a compulsion, but it's also compulsive avoidance. Yeah, it's not just acting out, it's acting in as well. Um, so yeah, these are all things that are important for us to end, or at least calm or change the relationship that we have with ourselves, our internal parts. Okay. So the next thing that I want to talk about that has been really beautiful for me in terms of my recovery, and living in the promises, is that I love in a very different way now. When I first came into recovery, I was really, really desperate. I came into recovery off the back of a really dysfunctional relationship. It was abusive on many levels. It was very codependent. I didn't know how to look after myself. I completely abandoned myself in that relationship. I just didn't know how to look after myself. And it was incredibly painful. And I just thought, you know what? And I had a child as well at the time. So I was just like, I I was terrified that if I stayed in this relationship, I just knew that the relationship that I had with my child was just going to be awful. I was just going to be a horrible mother, if I stayed in this dysfunctional relationship. And so, I invited this person, to go to therapy. This person did not want to go to therapy. So I was like, okay, well, I need to go to therapy. I need to do something myself. So I ended up I started going to therapy in the November of 2009. And then I went to my first recovery meeting around the same time. And then I started, my first set of recovery steps in the June of 2010. And things have never been the same. Like, my life has just really, really changed. And yeah, I just love very differently now. I love very differently now. What's different about the way that I love now is that I'm a lot more aware of my own how my trauma actually shows up in my relationships. How my trauma shows up, whether it's love relationship or relationship with friends and stuff like that. Whatever the love, however the love comes out, I have to also, not I have to, but I'm already aware of how my trauma shows up in those relationships. I know when I'm being avoidant, I know when I'm being anorexic, and I've really had to learn how to sip on love. I'm learning how to sip on love, which is a something that I've learned, I would say, more in the last few years, because relationships for me have always been they've been very traumatic, because I didn't attach to my parents the way that I should have done. And obviously I've been in abusive relationships for for most of my life. And so yeah, I've had to learn how to love very differently. But my system, gets very triggered when, even in the healthier relationships and friendships that I've been in, my system gets very triggered by it because of my history. My history. And so my system will keep reminding me, is this person safe? Is this okay? Is it okay to love this person? Is it okay for that person to love you? Is it okay for that person to be? My system doesn't trust love. There are parts of me that still don't trust love, younger parts of me that still don't trust love because of my history. So I've had to learn how to sip on love. I've had to learn how to let people in very gently, very slowly. But the relationships that I have now, the community that I have in my life now, is so goddamn beautiful. You know, I have people in my life now that genuinely love and care about me. And because of the work that I've done, both in therapy and in recovery, you know, I can let those people in, and I can share honestly, you know, when I am having a moment where I'm feeling anorexic, or I'm feeling avoidant around the closeness and stuff like that. I can have those honest conversations with people, and it's just so freeing to be able to share those parts of myself with people that I've grown to trust. I'm learning to trust myself a lot more. I'm learning to trust other people a lot more, you know. And I have what's something that happens that might not seem like a, you know, it might not seem like a good thing to some people, because people can sometimes get fixated on the numbers, the volume of people that they have in their lives. But I mean, for me, I've found that I have a smaller circle of people in my life, but the circle is solid. Okay. I have a smaller circle of people in my life, but that circle is very, very solid, you know, and I love that. You know, these are people that I trust. There are people that, you know, they're like chosen family to me now. You know, some of them are people that I went through the recovery process. I met in recovery fellowships that have now become, you know, brothers and sisters in fellowship, you know, in the sense that I see them outside. You know, these are people that love me. These are people that I've spent Christmases with. These are people that I spend birthdays with. These are people that, you know, I very much have a close relationship with them outside, you know, outside of fellowship, because, you know, obviously we've been through the trenches together in recovery, and you know, I learned to grow and trust these people, and there's a reciprocal respect and love that we have for each other, you know, and that is something so beautiful that I'm so grateful for, that happens in recovery, you know. So if you're struggling with recovery, and obviously the fact that I'm estranged from my family as well, you know, that's an added thing that is so important for me, to have my chosen family around me, because I've been estranged from my family. You know, I've had moments where I've had low contact. You know, when my dad was really unwell and stuff like that, and my dad passed away, I was low contact with my family. But you know, it's been like this for 16 years, and I've had long periods where I've had no contact at all, you know, and I'm in a period of no contact as we speak, you know, and that's because, you know, I have a more love for myself, and I'm more, you know, I protect my inner children, and I've had to protect myself. And that doesn't mean that, you know, I demonize my family, or I don't love my family. It doesn't mean that I don't love them. It just means that, you know, for various reasons, that my family are unsafe. There are certain people in my family that are unsafe for me, and I can't have a relationship with them. I can't do all of this work in recovery and therapy and then go back to the environment that, you know, that are responsible for creating some of the pain that I'm in, you know. And I have to be honest with myself as well about the fact that, you know, like, my family are not in therapy. A lot of my family members are not in therapy, as far as I'm aware. They're not in therapy. They're not doing their own work. They're not as conscious of this work, and so it becomes increasingly, over time, it became more and more painful for me to stay in that relationship, because I knew that, you know, you can't change people, you know. And in order to be in a relationship with somebody, they also have to want to do the work. They have to also want to be in relationship with you. They have to be willing to take responsibility for their part in the breakdown of the relationship. And how that's not how it was working in you know, my family dynamic. It was kind of like, you know, I was expected to be silent about my pain. I was expected to just, you know, accept the role that I've been assigned, consciously and unconsciously, and just kind of get on with it, you know. And the people didn't really want to take responsibility for their role, you know. They didn't want to make amends. They didn't want to, you know, do their own self-reflection, all of that stuff. And then when there's a lot of pain in families, as there is in mine, all of that stuff is very difficult, you know. And I say that without shade. There's no shade to my family, but it's just, you know, that's the reality. The reality is, you know, I've done so much work on my, and it doesn't mean that I think that I'm better than them. It's not that. It's just that my values have changed. I don't have the same values as my family anymore. And I have different requirements of what it means to be in a healthy relationship with somebody. And if those requirements are not, if I can't get those needs met in a relationship, or there's not a mutual understanding about that's how the relationship is going to be from a reciprocal perspective, then I can't stay in those relationships. I just can't do it, you know, because I'm abandoning myself, and I'm not going to abandon myself after 16 years of doing all of this work, you know. So, and it doesn't mean that, you know, that you necessarily have to do what I've done. You know, your journey is going to be your journey, your path is going to be your path. but that was my journey. And for me, living in the promises means that I have to be true to myself, means that sometimes the most loving thing that I could do for my family is to let them be, is to love them from a distance, is to, I can send them virtual love. I can send them, I can send them, yeah, I can send them goodness. I can send them nice energy. I can do all those things virtually, but I can't have a relationship with them, in the way that maybe they would like to, because it's just not, we're just on not on the same page when it comes to what we want out of a relationship. And I'm not willing to compromise, my own sanity, to do that. So yeah, I mean, love for me is something that is very different than what I thought it was, and to love someone and to be in a relationship with somebody is something that it requires a lot of self-reflection, and it requires being intentional about being in that relationship and not just accepting what is, not just accepting the dysfunction is what I'm trying to say. I mean, obviously, none of us are perfect. We've all got our own flaws. We've all got our own things going on. But there's a difference between somebody that is imperfectly perfect and somebody that wants to take responsibility for themselves, and somebody that is willing to apologize, or somebody that's willing to, yeah, somebody that wants to take responsibility for their part, and is doing their own work in recovery or therapy or whatever it is. That's a very different relationship, rather than having to accept somebody the way that they are when the relationship has been dysfunctional or it's been abusive at times and people don't want to take responsibility. It's very different. It's very different. You can accept, it's easier to accept somebody's imperfections if they're working on them, or if they've made a commitment to um to making amends to themselves, and being and taking responsibility for their behavior. It's very different energy. It's very different energy. And for me to love myself and allow other people into my life, that has to be a non-negotiable. That has to be a non-negotiable thing for anyone that's in my life. So, yeah, and that's there was the promises of that is that I do have some amazing people in my life. I have some badass people in my life right now, which I am incredibly grateful for. And yeah, recovery's given me that, because don't get me wrong, it doesn't mean that, I have an easy life. Like, it's been painful to make all these decisions. It's been painful letting people go. It's been painful setting boundaries, and being no contact. It's painful doing those things. And there's still grief and stuff that comes up around all of those things. It's still, when the anniversaries come around, when the birthdays come around, when all of that, there are still younger parts of me. I have to give those parts of myself space to grieve and check in with myself. Where am I with this person or that person or whatever it is? And I give myself permission on whatever the anniversary is to say and feel whatever I need to feel. There's still grief. This is another part of the promises, living in the promises, that's important. I mean, I was numb for a long time. Okay, when it came to my emotions, especially the grief, I've probably been doing more embodied grief work, I would say, for the last 3 years. Being in therapy, I've done a lot more grief work in the last 3 years, and there's been a huge thawing, massive thawing around the grief, because I just couldn't get to it. I was just too numb. I didn't have capacity to be able to hold the depth of grief that was there. And I now it always astounds me how deep the grief is, and I'm able to access it now because I've over the 16 years I've been chipping away at it. I've been talking about it in therapy. I've been talking about it in recovery. I've been writing about it. I've been doing, somatic work. I've been doing shaking meditation. There was so many grief rituals that I've done over the years, even when I felt like I was numb to it, even though when I thought that I couldn't feel anything, even when I couldn't cry, I was still kept chipping away at it. Now I'm in a much better place where I am more connected, to my grief. And it still comes in waves. It's, the grief around doing this work, not just the stuff in the family of origin, but the stuff around race, the stuff around, the grief of my ancestors and all of that stuff is not something that's just going to magically go away just because you're in recovery. And that's something that I had to learn, because I was thinking, when I first came into recovery, I was thinking like, oh, well, maybe I won't feel, maybe I won't need to feel my feelings anymore. Maybe I won't feel pain anymore if I do this work. But that's not the reality. The reality is I still feel pain. I still feel the grief, but my relationship to it has changed. Okay. And if I do find myself in deep grief, or if I'm in pain about something, it doesn't drag on and on like it used to. I know that I can go and talk about it in a recovery meeting. I know that I can talk to my therapist about it. I know that I have, I can talk to my community about it, my chosen family. I can talk about these with my friend with my community, with my close friends, or chosen family, and it eases the burden. It lightens the load. I can metabolize it. I can process it through my body. I can process it psychic, in my psyche. I can journal it out. And there are so many tools that I have now that I use. And so these different tools do different things. Yeah, these different tools do different things. And I've got to a point in my recovery now where I understand which tools work best for where I'm at, and I give myself permission to, yeah, to do that. It's not, it doesn't have to be rigid. I don't necessarily have a structured thing that I do. If I'm in grief, I have to use this specific tool. I have loads of different tools for grief, and depending on where I'm at, it depends on what I use different tools for different types of grief and who I'm grieving, what type of grief. There are so many different nuances around these things, but it's just that I've increased my toolbox so much over the years, and that's what's really helped me. So, and I'll be writing about all of this stuff in the book, and and in the stuff that I'm going to be doing over the next few weeks, few months, and few years. So if you're interested, if you're in recovery, if you're in therapy, and you are interested in learning more about this stuff, especially the book that I'm writing, then you can click the link in my bio, go to heal.juneallen.net. That's heal.juneallen.net. That's heal.juneallen.net. Okay. So the next one, this is a huge one. Okay. I plan my calendar or my life from capacity, not productivity. Okay, this is huge. Okay, I plan my life from capacity, not productivity. This is massive. I spent years beating myself up, cussing myself out, getting annoyed with myself, shaming myself because I was pushing through all of my pain, pushing through all of my discomfort, pushing through my grief, going, you need to get this done today. You have to do X, Y, Z. You're a failure if you don't do A, B, C, D. And I never used to think about capacity. I never used to think about what was going on in my body. I never used to think about my nervous system. This is how it was in the early days. I would just push through thinking, oh my gosh, I have to do these things. That's survival thinking, that's survival behavior. And I get it. Those parts of me were trying to help me to get things done, to achieve certain things, but I still felt like shit. I still felt, even though I'd be productive, I felt awful. So now what recovery has taught me, what therapy has taught me, is that I start with capacity. That's one of the first things that I ask myself when I wake up or when I sit down, at my desk to work or whatever. Not necessarily, obviously, when I'm not working with clients, but that's a different type of conversation. But when I'm just get up generally, and I'm starting my work day, I ask myself, okay, well, what's going on in my system today? What's my nervous system doing? Are there any anniversaries? Because whether I consciously think about anniversaries or not, my body still remembers. So I have a look in my calendar. Are there any anniversary that I need to think about that might impact how I'm working today? Do I need to be extra gentle with myself today if I've got clients? Is there anything that I need to take out of my calendar today if I've got admin or anything like that I need to take out? How can I simplify the day? If I've got clients and I've got low capacity, how do I manage, how am I going to manage those things? Do I need to put in a meditation session before I see clients, or even if I do a 3-minute meditation in between clients or whatever, to help me if my capacity is feeling low? Have I got anything booked in after the clients that I can reschedule if my capacity is not great? If I'm at full capacity, is there stuff that I can put in? So these are the things. So, and I do this all the time now with my system, because even after I've planned the whole day of things that I should be doing, I could or shouldn't be doing, should or shouldn't be doing, if I wake up in the morning, my system might be saying something else. So I'm constantly checking in with myself about what's working, what's not working, how's my system doing, all of that kind of stuff. So that, and even during the day, I'm constantly still asking myself that question as well. So then, when I do that, it just means that the planning really is coming from capacity, and I'm meeting my own needs. So I don't end the day totally exhausted, completely abandoning myself. I'm not doing all of that, because then I end up resenting, I end up with this exhaustion pendulum, this exhaustion. I'm pushing, 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 and then I crash at the end of the day. That's my workaholic compulsion. That's my workaholic pattern. And I've been there, done that, got the t-shirt, and it don't work. So working with my nervous system, asking myself, checking in with myself internally, having questions, for myself throughout the day, making sure that I'm scheduling in, when I'm going to have my lunch, what I'm going to have for lunch, having a little meditation session after I've had my lunch. Sometimes I go and have a nap, or go outside, whatever it is, whatever my system wants to do. And the day just flows so much more. It's just so much more loving. It's so much more of a loving experience with myself when I do that. And recovery's given me that. Recovery has given me permission to do that. Doesn't mean I don't sometimes get anxious about, oh my gosh, I'm having all of this time and I need to do this, that, and the other because of my system, but I've got this, that, and the other to do. Doesn't mean I don't have those thoughts and feelings, but this is about how I have to learn to trust myself. I have to trust my system. I have to trust that I'm going to be okay, and that things are not going to go, things are not going to collapse completely if I go and have a nap, because my system needs those. My system needs that. My system needs that. And it is really hard. It is really hard. And I'm constantly negotiating, with my system and the things that I need to do on a daily basis, parenting and all the rest of it, the CPTSD. I'm having to, work with those things every day. But I do know that when I give myself permission to lean into those things and do those things, life becomes a lot more joyful. Life becomes a lot more grounded. I have a much better relationship with myself. And actually, I get a lot more done, not within the context of, oh, I've done, not in terms of productivity, but I feel like my life is more, or my business is more successful within the context of, because I've rested, because I've taken care of myself. And the thing is, as well, as a therapist, I am my product. So if I mash up, how can I be talking to my clients about rest and taking care of themselves if I mash up, if I'm not present? I have to practice what I preach in order for me to be present. And obviously, I'm doing a lot of trauma work with clients. I do a lot of trauma work. It's all trauma work that I do with my clients. In order for me to be present with them, I have to take care of myself. So I have to practice what I preach. I have to practice what I preach. And this is the reason why, I don't do 30 clients a week. This is the reason why, my prices are the way that they are priced. Because, I don't have a full client roster like a lot of other therapists. And it's no shade to other therapists that do that. But when I'm constantly doing trauma work and I'm doing the things that I'm doing, I have to take care of myself. I have to take care of myself. I'm talking about topics that are traumatic, that are difficult, so I have to take care of myself. But again, I've had to learn that over time. Recovery has given me that. Therapy has given me that. It's given me permission to start to learn how to trust myself and really take care of myself. And that has been such a joy. It's been a real blessing to be able to do that for myself. So yeah, that's been really great. So yeah, so I plan from capacity, not productivity. Okay, so what's the next one? Yeah, my relationship with my higher power is very different. My relationship with my higher power, has switched from not wanting to engage with a higher power at all, because I was raised on kind of my parents were a Pentecostal, very strict kind of Christian Pentecostal. I grew up with images of white Jesus, all that kind of, which is not my jam. It ain't my jam. White Jesus is not, it's not going to do it for me. It doesn't do it for me. So over time I've had to realign my relationship with spirituality, and now I very much embrace the concept of my art. Nature is my higher power, and also kind of connecting with the divinity within myself. I don't disconnect that from the concept of me as a human being. Like, I am a cup of God. I'm a cup of my higher power. I'm part of spirit. I'm not separate from it. And I know that even recovery, there's something in recovery that kind of that there is that separation, that somehow, you are powerless, and that, you need something external. And yes, it is a spiritual program, and I get all of that, but there's something about understanding or accepting that also I am I'm a cup of my higher power, and that embracing that divinity within. And it's not just something that I have to chase externally. I'm going to talk about this a bit more in the book as well. um but yeah, it's important, to have a aligned relationship with my higher power, because recovery is a spiritual program, and that is part of the process. Switching from, doing everything in self-will, thinking I have to do everything by myself, all of that, to, connecting to spirit, connecting to a power greater than yourself, that is within and also external too. It's both. That's kind of how I relate to my higher power now. And it's really changed the game, because there are times where I have felt overwhelmed, and there have been times where I've felt in a lot of pain, and there have been times where, I've felt powerless over certain relationships that have been painful for me, and all of that kind of stuff. But and so in those moments, I've needed to hand over the process to something greater than myself, and to hand it over to the divinity within me, the parts of me, the spiritual parts of me, the spiritual parts that are external, that I don't understand, that that I'm supposed to, what the lessons that I'm supposed to learn out of these. There are some things that I just don't know, I just don't understand, as a human being. There's parts of me that I just don't, they're just parts of this process that I just can't name and understand. And I'm not supposed to either. That's part of the learning to trust conversation. But, learning to trust, learning to hand over those, when I have those difficult challenges, over to a power greater than myself, whatever that is, has been really freeing. And being able to relate to a higher power within the context of my culture has been a game changer. And that's a part of me honoring my culture, honoring my ancestors, honoring who I am as a Black woman. I needed to see a higher power, that looks and feels like who I am as an African person. That was really important for me to be able to have that. And so yeah, that's been a real game changer for me, and it's been really, really very powerful. Um, so yeah, so just to kind of wrap up, I just want to say that, recovery is really giving me a future. When I first came into recovery, I was very much in the moment, like I was in survival mode, like I was in a lot of pain, in the present. I was in an extreme amount of pain. And so I was in survival mode. I was just trying to make the pain stop. Give me tools to make the pain stop was the conversation. But now, it doesn't mean that I don't feel pain now. I still feel pain. But again, my relationship to my pain is very different. And it means that, I have more tools now. I have a community that I can share my pain with. I have a way of metabolizing and processing my pain. And I can also understand that I can also build a future, and yeah, I have a lot more hope in the future, a lot more hope. And that has been really amazing, because I'm able to put things in my future, plan things for my future, with my friends, with my family, with people that I really deeply care about and love. I can start to plan things for my future, which I never had any energy or capacity to even think about that stuff before in the past. I was just like, I don't know, the future just feels like shit. So I'm just going to focus on now. How am I going to get through the day? How am I going to get through the next hour? I've had lots of moments like that. How the hell am I going to get through the next hour? You know? But recovery has given me hope, because when I've had moments like that, when I've had challenging days, when I've been in a lot of pain, physical and emotional, spiritual pain, all of that, I know I can just go to a meeting. Then even if I don't want to share, even if I don't want to share, even if I don't want to open my mouth, even if I'm resentful of my higher power, even if I don't want to do step work, even if I don't want to call my sponsor, if I don't want to do none of those things, I know I can just get to a meeting and sit down and listen. I can just connect with the program, and just know that if I just stay there, if I just stay in the meeting and just listen to what's going on at a basic level, I'm gonna be all right. I just know that I'm gonna be all right. And so I'm just incredibly grateful that, living in the promises means that I have now been given a future. I've given myself permission to give myself a future. And that feels really good that I'm not just surviving in trying to just get through the day. I can start to plant seeds that are going to nourish my future. And that's really important for me individually and also as a parent and also with my friends and people that I really love. I want my friends to be in my future. I want to put experiences in the future that's going to nourish the relationships that I have in my life. And that has been a real gift for me. It's been a real gift. Um, so yeah, so some of the things that yeah, the other thing that I just want to say as well, just to kind of close, is that I just have more joy. I have more joy, I experience more joy and I give a lot of joy as well. I have people in my life, people that I care about, people that I love very deeply, that I connect with, that I laugh with, I have a lot more beautiful life experience with. I'm traveling a lot more. There were so many just wonderful things that are happening. My life feels a lot more abundant. And this is not necessarily about money, even though that's part of it, that I feel more abundant within the context of the richness of my relationships, the richness of how I experience life, the richness of the relationship that I have with my daughter, the richness of the relationships that I have with my chosen family, with people that I love and care about dearly. Those relationships, they're very different. And my relationship with my higher power is very different. These are all things that just are make my life so much more abundant. And that's what, for me, that's what it means to live in the promises. It's the awareness, it's giving myself permission to be my full self, and to accept all of the parts of me, the wounded parts, the parts that are scared, the parts that are cheeky, the parts that are sensual, the queer parts of me, the parts of me that are sad. I accept all the parts of me. I'm much more compassionate to the parts of me that are wounded. But in doing that, in accepting, being more accepting of all of the parts, it just means there's a lot more space, there's a lot more joy, there's a lot more creativity. There are lots of things that I'm doing now that I would never have been doing, 16 years ago. I'm writing poetry, I'm writing this book. I do a lot more crafty things. When I say crafty things, I'm talking about things that I do with my hands. I am crafty in that sense, in the psychological sense as well. I'm cheeky, but I do a lot more crafty things. I'm just a lot more creative, and I'm just enjoying my life a lot more. So if you are new to recovery, if you've been in recovery a long time, if you're having a SHIT time at the moment, if you're in grief, if you're struggling, if you're in pain, I encourage you, I empower you just to keep doing the work. Keep doing the work. Keep showing up for yourself. Keep chipping away at it. Keep going to meetings. Just do what you need to do. Do what you need to do. Keep chipping away at it, because your life definitely will change if you just keep working your program, if you keep showing up, if you keep journaling, if you keep embodying what you need to embody, do the somatic work, keep going to therapy. If you're having difficult relationship, or if you're with a therapist that's not working for you, get another one. If you go to a recovery meeting, you don't like it, go to a different meeting. If you got a sponsor, it's not working for you, get a different sponsor. If you got an action partner that's not working for you, get a different action partner. Don't allow these things to stop you doing the work that you need to do. Just keep moving forward. And you can, and I'm not talking about dumping people or being disrespectful. I'm not talking about any of that. I'm talking about you just being true to yourself, because things will change over the years. You're going to change over the years, and that means your needs are going to change. That means the people that you used to hang out with are going to change. That means that your relational requirements are going to change over the years, as you change, as you get more sober, as you become more, not just sober within the context of drinking drugs, but emotionally sober, racially sober. As your racial sobriety changes and you become a different person, you're going to want to do different things. You're going to have different requirements around people. And that, there's going to be grief that comes with all of that. But the beauty that comes with that is just so delicious. The beauty that comes with all of that change is so delicious. So just keep doing the work, keep chipping away at it. Okay, keep chipping away at it. that's it for today. So if you have any questions about anything that I've shared today, you can email me info@yardofgreatness.com. If you know somebody who's in recovery, or you're thinking about being in recovery yourself, and or someone that you think might benefit from my recovery, my sobriety journey that I've shared about today, share this podcast with them. Okay, if you're looking for a therapist, if you're looking for a business coach, if you're looking for a speaker for your event, you can email me info@godofgreatness.com, or you can go to my website, go to heal.juneallen.net. That's heal.juneallen.net. That's heal.juneallen.net. Have an amazing day today, and I will see you next time. Thank you for spending this time with me, and I'll see you again soon. All right, take care. Bye bye.